The American Civil War. By the spring of 1864, the conflict had raged for 3 long, bloody years. The Union had secured key victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, but the Confederacy remained defiant, a stubborn and resilient foe. The Northern public was growing weary of the war, its staggering cost in lives and treasure. The upcoming presidential election loomed over Abraham Lincoln, and many wondered if the Union could truly be restored. It was in this desperate, pivotal moment that Lincoln found the general he had been searching for all along. His name was Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was different. He wasn't a man of grand theories or flashy maneuvers. He was a plain, determined fighter who understood a brutal, simple truth. Wars weren't won by capturing capitals or winning symbolic battles. Wars were won by annihilating the enemy's ability to fight. After his stunning successes in the Western theater, culminating in the capture of Vicksburg, which split the Confederacy along the Mississippi, Lincoln knew he had his man. In March 1864, Grant was promoted to lieutenant general, a rank previously held only by George Washington. He was given command of all Union armies. For the first time, the North would have a unified, coordinated strategy. Grant's plan was as simple as it was ambitious. It was a continent-wide vice designed to squeeze the Confederacy from all sides. He called it concentration in time. Instead of Union armies operating independently on different timetables, they would all advance at once, preventing the Confederates from using their interior lines to shuttle troops from one quiet front to another active one. Multiple armies would press forward in Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley, and the Deep South. The objective was relentless, unceasing pressure. There would be no more long pauses to rest and refit. The fight would continue day after day until the South broke. The centerpiece of this grand strategy involved 2 main thrusts. Grant himself would travel with the Army of the Potomac in the east, personally directing its movements against Robert E. Lee's legendary Army of Northern Virginia. His goal wasn't to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. It was to find and destroy Lee's army. Meanwhile, the second major blow would be delivered in the West. For this critical task, Grant turned to his most trusted subordinate, a man who shared his vision of total war. Major General William Tecumseh Sherman. Sherman was a brilliant, energetic, and often controversial figure. He was restless, sharp-tongued, and possessed a keen understanding of military strategy and logistics. Having served under Grant at Vicksburg and Chattanooga, the 2 men had developed an almost telepathic understanding. They knew what needed to be done, and they trusted each other implicitly to do it. While Grant hammered Lee in Virginia, Sherman was given command of the Union forces massed around Chattanooga, Tennessee. His orders were direct and devastating. He was to move against the Confederate Army of Tennessee, commanded by the cautious but capable General Joseph E. Johnston. Sherman's task was twofold. First, like Grant, his primary objective was the enemy army. He was to get into the interior of the enemy's country as far as you can, inflicting all the damage you can against their war resources. Destroy Johnston's army, and the western heartland of the Confederacy would be defenseless. But Grant's orders contained a second, more ominous component. It wasn't just about defeating soldiers, it was about destroying the South's very capacity to wage war. This meant targeting railroads, factories, supply depots, and agricultural resources. It was a strategy aimed not just at the Confederate government, but at the Southern people themselves, to break their will to continue the fight. 1 war, 2 generals, and a plan that would burn the Confederacy from the inside. Standing in Sherman's way was General Joseph E. Johnston and the Army of Tennessee. Johnston was a master of defensive warfare. He knew his army was outnumbered and outgunned. Johnston's goal was political as much as it was military. He hoped to bleed Sherman's army, slowing its advance and inflicting enough casualties to demoralize the North. He knew that if he could just hold out until the November presidential election, the war-weary Northern public might vote Lincoln out of office. A new administration might sue for peace, and the Confederacy could win its independence not on the battlefield, but at the ballot box. It was a calculated, intelligent, and dangerous strategy. The stage was set for a titanic clash of wills. Sherman's relentless drive versus Johnston's masterful defense. So, as the spring of 1864 blossomed, The two main gears of Grant's great machine began to turn. In early May, Grant crossed the Rapidan River in Virginia, initiating the brutal overland campaign. The Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, these names would become synonymous with some of the most ferocious and costly fighting of the entire war. Grant absorbed horrific casualties but refused to turn back. After each bloody encounter, instead of retreating to lick his wounds as his predecessors had done, he would sidle to the left, always pressing south, always staying locked with Lee. He was a bulldog who would not let go. Simultaneously, hundreds of miles to the southwest, Sherman began his own inexorable advance from Chattanooga. His campaign would become a masterclass in maneuver and logistics. Rather than repeatedly throwing his men against Johnston's entrenched positions, Sherman used his numerical superiority to flank the Confederates. While part of his army fixed Johnston in place, another part would swing around the side, threatening the Confederate line of supply, the vital Western and Atlantic Railroad that led to Atlanta. Time and again, Johnston would build a seemingly impregnable position, only to find Sherman's blue columns appearing on his flank or in his rear, forcing him to abandon his defenses and retreat to avoid being trapped. This lethal dance continued for months. From Rocky Face Ridge to Resaca, from New Hope Church to Kennesaw Mountain, the two armies wrestled their way across northern Georgia. Sherman's bummers became experts at living off the land, and more importantly, at destroying the railroad that was Johnston's lifeline. They would heat the rails over giant bonfires and then twist them around trees, creating what came to be known as Sherman's neckties. Every mile Sherman advanced, he was not only pushing an army back, he was severing the arteries of the Confederacy. The strategic goal was becoming clearer with every step south. The target was Atlanta. More than just a city, Atlanta was the industrial heart of the Confederacy, a critical hub of foundries, factories, and railroads that supplied the Southern war effort. Its capture would be a devastating material and psychological blow. It would prove to the world, and more importantly to the voters in the North, that the Union was winning and that Grant's strategy of total war was working. The fall of Atlanta could very well secure Lincoln's re-election and seal the fate of the Confederacy. And so, as the summer of 1864 wore on, the fate of the nation hung on the outcomes of these two massive campaigns. In Virginia, Grant was slowly but surely bleeding Lee's army white, pinning it down in a siege around Petersburg and Richmond. And in Georgia, Sherman was closing in on Atlanta, the prize that would justify the horrific cost of the war and shatter the South's hope for a negotiated peace. The master plan was in motion. The vice was tightening. The very foundation of the Confederacy was beginning to crumble, not from a single decisive blow, but from relentless grinding pressure designed to break its armies, its infrastructure, and ultimately, its will to exist. The march that would change America forever had begun. The story of Sherman's campaign is one of the most dramatic and consequential of the entire Civil War, and we'll be diving deeper into the fall of Atlanta and the legendary March to the Sea. William Tecumseh Sherman as he begins his relentless march toward the heart of the Confederacy, Atlanta. The story of the road to Atlanta, fire, blood, and siege. In May of 1864, Sherman's massive force, over 100,000 strong, pushed south from Chattanooga. His opponent was the wily Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston, who commanded a smaller but battle-hardened army. Johnston knew he couldn't win a head-on fight. His strategy was one of calculated retreat, a brilliant tactical withdrawal designed to bleed Sherman's army and stretch its supply lines to the breaking point. Sherman's first major obstacle was the fortified position at Dalton, Georgia. Instead of a costly frontal assault, he opted for a flanking maneuver, sending part of his army through a gap in the mountains to threaten Johnston's rear. This move forced Johnston to abandon Dalton and fall back to Resaca. The Battle of Resaca, fought from May 13th to the 15th, was a brutal, sprawling affair. Union forces hammered the Confederate lines, but Johnston's men held firm. Yet again, Sherman used his superior numbers to flank the Confederates, compelling Johnston to retreat once more. This became the pattern of the campaign, a deadly dance of feint, flank, and fall back. Sherman would probe, find a weak spot, and swing around Johnston's army, forcing him to give up ground to avoid being trapped. As the Union Army moved deeper into Georgia, the fighting became more intense and personal. Every river crossing, every wooded ridge became a battlefield. Soldiers on both sides endured scorching summer heat, sudden downpours that turned roads into mud pits, and the constant gnawing tension of impending combat. Johnston's men grew frustrated with the constant retreats, but they trusted their commander, digging in at each new position, from Adairsville to New Hope Church, and making Sherman pay for every inch of ground. The campaign reached a bloody crescendo at Kennesaw Mountain in late June. Frustrated with Johnston's evasive tactics and eager for a decisive victory, Sherman abandoned his flanking strategy for a moment. He ordered a massive frontal assault on the heavily entrenched Confederate positions on the mountain slopes. On June 27th, thousands of Union soldiers charged into a whirlwind of rifle and cannon fire. It was a disaster. The Confederates securely dug in, repelled the attack with devastating efficiency, inflicting thousands of casualties while suffering relatively few. Kennesaw Mountain was a stark and bloody reminder of the folly of attacking a well-defended position. It was a tactical victory for Johnston, but it wouldn't change the strategic reality. Sherman, though stung, quickly returned to his tried-and-true flanking maneuvers, and the relentless advance toward Atlanta continued. Back in Washington, President Abraham Lincoln watched these events with growing anxiety. The year 1864 was an election year, and his presidency hung in the balance. The war was dragging on, casualties were mounting, and a wave of war weariness was sweeping across the North. Many were calling for a negotiated peace. Lincoln desperately needed a major military victory to bolster public morale and secure his re-election. Atlanta was more than just a military objective. It was a political necessity. The fate of the Union, and of Lincoln's vision for it, depended on Sherman's success. Meanwhile, in the Confederate capital of Richmond, President Jefferson Davis was losing patience with Johnston's strategy. While tactically sound, the constant retreating gave the impression of defeat. The Southern public and press clamored for a general who would stand and fight, not one who would give up vital territory without a decisive battle. Johnston had successfully slowed Sherman, but he hadn't stopped him. Atlanta, the critical rail hub and industrial center, was now directly in Sherman's sights. The pressure on Davis to make a change was immense. In mid-July, with Sherman's army on the outskirts of Atlanta, Jefferson Davis made a fateful decision. He relieved the cautious Joseph E. Johnston of command and replaced him with General John Bell Hood. Hood was Johnston's opposite in every way, young, aggressive, and willing to risk everything for a chance at victory. He had a reputation for battlefield bravery, having lost an arm at Gettysburg and a leg at Chickamauga. Now he was being asked to save Atlanta. Hood wasted no time. Just days after taking command, he launched a series of ferocious counterattacks, starting with the Battle of Peachtree Creek on July 20th. Hood's plan was to strike a portion of Sherman's army as it crossed the creek, hoping to catch it divided and vulnerable. The fighting was fierce and chaotic, but poor coordination among the Confederate units doomed the attack. Union forces held their ground, and Hood's first gamble failed, at a high cost in men. Undeterred, Hood struck again 2 days later in what became known as the Battle of Atlanta. He threw his troops against the Union left flank, achieving initial surprise and success. For a moment, it seemed the Confederate gamble might pay off. The fighting raged through the city's eastern suburbs, some of the most desperate of the entire war. But once again, Union reinforcements rushed to the scene, and the Confederate assault was beaten back after hours of bloody combat. These aggressive attacks, while demonstrating Confederate resolve, were devastatingly costly. In just over a week, Hood had lost nearly as many men as Johnston had during 2 months of retreat. With Hood's army crippled and unable to launch further large-scale attacks, the Atlanta campaign shifted from a war of maneuver to a war of siege. Sherman's forces tightened their grip around the city. His artillery began a relentless, weeks-long bombardment, raining shells down on military targets and civilian neighborhoods alike. For the people of Atlanta, life became a nightmare. They sought shelter in basements and dugouts, which they called bomb-proofs, as their city was systematically destroyed around them. The once bustling hub fell silent, except for the terrifying whistle and explosion of incoming artillery. The siege was a brutal ordeal, testing the endurance of soldiers and civilians alike. The fall of Atlanta was now just a matter of time. In the autumn of 1864, the American Civil War was entering its brutal endgame. The Confederacy, though battered, was not yet broken. It would take a new, terrifying kind of warfare to finally shatter its will to fight, a 60-mile-wide path of destruction carved through the heart of the South. This is Sherman's march to the sea. Sherman standing amidst the ruins of Atlanta, a city he had captured and then, controversially, ordered burned. But for Sherman, Atlanta wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He had a radical, audacious plan. Instead of chasing the Confederate army through the mountains, he would turn his back on them entirely. He would cut his own supply lines and march his 62,000 men straight through Georgia to the Atlantic Ocean, living off the land and destroying everything that could possibly support the Confederate war effort. His fellow generals, including Ulysses S. Grant, and even President Lincoln himself, were skeptical. It was a massive gamble. If his army was trapped or ran out of food, it would be a disaster unparalleled in the war. But Sherman was convinced. He argued that to win the war, they had to do more than just defeat Confederate armies in the field. They had to break the spirit of the Southern people. He famously said, "We are not only fighting hostile armies but a hostile people, and must make old and young, rich and poor, feel the hard hand of war." On November 15, 1864, Sherman cut the telegraph lines to Washington, severing his last link to the outside world. For the next month, his army would seemingly vanish from the map. As the Union columns moved out of Atlanta, they fanned out, creating a front that stretched for miles. Their mission was clear: destroy all infrastructure that could aid the rebellion. This wasn't just about blowing up bridges and tearing up railroad tracks, though they did that with ruthless efficiency. The soldiers developed a technique called Sherman's neckties, where they'd heat railroad rails over bonfires and then twist them around trees, rendering them permanently useless. But the campaign went further. They targeted the very source of the South's economic and psychological strength. The soldiers were organized into foraging parties, nicknamed bummers. Their official job was to gather food and supplies for the army, taking what they needed from the farms and plantations they passed. But often it devolved into systematic plunder. They seized livestock, emptied smokehouses, and stripped fields bare. What they couldn't carry, they often destroyed to prevent it from falling back into Confederate hands. Grand pianos were chopped up for firewood, family portraits were slashed with bayonets, and libraries were ransacked. For the civilians in their path, it was terrifying. For the soldiers, it was a mix of necessity and, for some, a grim form of revenge for years of bloody conflict. This was total war. It was a psychological campaign as much as a military one. Sherman wanted the people of Georgia to feel so utterly defeated, so hopeless, that they would demand their leaders surrender. Every burned barn, every looted home was a message sent directly to the Confederate government. You cannot protect your people. The war is lost. News of the march, though distorted by rumor, spread like wildfire across the South. It created panic and despair, exactly as Sherman intended. Confederate morale, already fragile, began to crumble. Soldiers on the front lines, hearing that their homes and families were in the path of Sherman's army, started deserting in droves to go protect them. Meanwhile, in the North, there was silence. For weeks, no one knew where Sherman was or what had happened to his army. They had marched into the heart of enemy territory and disappeared. President Lincoln waited anxiously for news. Had the gamble paid off, or had he lost 62,000 veteran troops? The suspense was immense. Then, on December 21, 1864, a telegram arrived in Washington. It was from Sherman. His army had reached the coast and captured the vital port city of Savannah without a major fight. The Confederate defenders, seeing the writing on the wall, had fled. In his now famous message to the president, Sherman wrote, "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah, with 150 heavy guns and plenty of ammunition, also about 25,000 bales of cotton." The North erupted in celebration. The gamble had been a spectacular success. Sherman was hailed as a hero, the man who had broken the back of the Confederacy. The march to the sea didn't end the war on its own, but it was a devastating blow from which the Confederacy could not recover. After resting in Savannah, Sherman turned his army north and unleashed a similar campaign of destruction through the Carolinas, the very cradle of secession. This march was, by many accounts, even more destructive than the one through Georgia. Sherman and his men held a special animosity for South Carolina, which they blamed for starting the war. When they reached the state capital, Columbia, much of the city went up in flames. By April 1865, it was all over. Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, and a few weeks later, the remaining major Confederate force under Joseph E. Johnston surrendered to Sherman in North Carolina. The Civil War was finally over, but the legacy of Sherman's march would endure for generations. In the South, Sherman became a villain, a symbol of Yankee cruelty and destruction. The stories of his march were passed down, becoming a core part of the lost cause narrative. The idea that the South had fought honorably, but was crushed by overwhelming and barbaric force. For many, the bitterness over the destruction of their homes and economy would last for over a century. The march left deep economic and psychological scars that shaped the region's development for decades. In military history, however, Sherman's march is studied as a pivotal moment in the evolution of modern warfare. He demonstrated the effectiveness of targeting an enemy's logistical and psychological centers of gravity, not just their armies. His concept of total war would be echoed on a far larger and more terrifying scale in the world wars of the 20th century. He proved that sometimes the swiftest way to end a conflict is to make the cost of continuing it unbearably high for the entire enemy population. So, was Sherman a war criminal, or a brilliant strategist who saved lives by shortening a brutal war? It's a question historians still debate today. He wasn't a monster who reveled in destruction for its own sake. He was a cold, pragmatic general who believed that war is inherently cruel, and the best way to deal with it is to make it so terrible for your enemy that they surrender quickly. "War is hell," he famously stated, and through Georgia, he brought that hell to the doorsteps of the Confederacy to force an end to the national nightmare. His march remains one of the most compelling and controversial chapters in American history, a testament to the brutal calculus of war and the terrible price of victory.